I don't know about you guys, but to me, the Dreamcast was a peak console. It definitely helped me being a Sega kid growing up, but even so, it was a frighteningly innovative piece of technology in its own right, between its incredibly advanced graphics for the time, online functionality in the 90s, and most importantly, one of the strongest game libraries on any console. Sonic Adventure, Jet Set Radio, Shenmue, such a vibrant catalogue that I'm insanely grateful I grew up playing, even if the Dreamcast was one of the lesser popular console choices of that era. But one area I completely neglected growing up was the Dreamcast horror catalogue. Anytime I wanted a spooky fix, I just booted up the PlayStation 2 instead, so while I loved this console dearly, scary Dreamcast games are where my knowledge fails me. So what finally made me take the plunge? Learning that one of my favourite movies, The Ring, had an entire video game on the Dreamcast that I never knew about until recent years. The Ring, of course, is a J-horror staple. Whether we're talking the Japanese original movie or its American adaptation, it is a classic of the genre. But when this game dropped, that American adaptation still hadn't released yet. Only the Japanese movie, which realistically you only would have known about if you were super in the know about J-horror. So, that is to say, if you were a Dreamcast owner and a horror fan in the year 2000, this may have been your first ever exposure to what would eventually become one of the most successful and well-known horror IPs ever. Being the J-horror giant that The Ring is, it's actually had quite a number of video games over the years, and it's a rather fascinating deep dive. The Ring Terror's Realm on the Dreamcast was just the first of many, and also the only one to ever release in English. So let's get into it. Let's start our journey through the cursed world of Ring games with The Ring Terror's Realm on the Dreamcast. As soon as we boot up the game, we get an opening that blends the in-game FMVs with footage of the infamous cursed tape from the original Japanese Ring movie. Pretty standard main menu. If we scroll down to the options here, we... Oh. Now, before I'd even realised it, these cartoony stock squelch sound effects set the tone of Ring Terror's Realm frighteningly well. It is a very unserious game, and given that it's a late 90s, early 2000s horror game from Japan, I have a feeling that was not the intention. The opening cutscene showcases this perfectly. It needs to be seen to be believed, and I also staunchly believe this is one of the best cutscenes I've ever seen in a game. We're introduced to Meg, the main character, speaking to her boyfriend Robert. They both got a new job working at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and decide to go out for a celebratory drink. But when Meg arrives at Robert's house, she sees a bunch of cops and ambulances, and I'll let the game do the rest.
Hey, miss. No, I'm sorry, you can't come in here. You're gonna have to get out of here. Or do you live here?
What's happened, officer?
What's happened, officer? No, I'm asking you a question. Do you live here? Hello? Miss?
Watch out!
Robert?
Hello? Hey. Hey, stop, lady.
No! No, I can't believe it's Robert! No!
You okay, lady?
Meg! What's going on over there? Like, hey man, what's happening here?
Hold on a moment, sir.
I know the two of them. They're friends. What happened? I don't believe this.
I see.
Oh, Meg.
Could you explain your relationship to either her or the victim?
Yeah, I know the two of them. They're both my friends. I'm Jack, and this is Robert's girlfriend, Meg.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm
What
sorry.
happened to Robert?
Actually, we don't yet exactly know what happened to him this evening.
You don't know? Isn't this a murder?
Okay.
It's unlikely to be a homicide case.
Not a murder? Then what's that? Did you see his face? What's happened? Oh my god!
Well, we'll get to the bottom of this.
I'm still alive. I'll work for this company without you, Robert. I shouldn't mourn your death forever. Right.
Whew! After losing her boyfriend, mourning him, and moving on from him in the span of 60 seconds, we finally get to see what this game actually plays like. And it'll come as no surprise to you that it is indeed a Resi clone. In fact, the series it was imitating was also its biggest competitor on the console, as Code Veronica released on the Dreamcast only 2 weeks before The Ring Terror's Realm did in February 2000. America got it half a year later, and it never released at all in Europe. Then how am I playing it right now? I do wonder. Though in fairness, Terror's Realm does do some things to give the classic Resident Evil formula a funky twist. You discover pretty quickly that you're able to teleport into a computer program called Ring. As such, the game is divided into 2 styles. The real-world sections focus more on progressing the narrative and dialogue with other characters, whereas the Ring sections are where there'll be more combat and resource management and basically the survival horror side of it. Though I very rarely found myself needing to, well, manage my resources. Item pickups are plentiful, and you don't really have to go out of your way to find them either. As long as you're not a killing machine mowing down everything in your path, you'll never be short on ammo. I found myself with well over 100 handgun bullets at one point. And speaking of combat, The Ring Terror's Realm is a bit of a weird one that way. The majority of enemies in the game are either strange goblin-looking creatures or very aggressive monkeys. We'll get to that later. But their design, as in how they behave as enemies, is very interesting. Well, for one, their movement and animations are awfully sluggish. Assuming you're familiar with classic survival horrors and how they play, this game will feel like easy mode in comparison. Enemy attack animations are so slow and predictable that your window for error is frighteningly generous. There were many moments where an enemy was going in for a hit, but I was already halfway down the hallway running away from them while they were still stuck in the animation. Now, that makes it all sound very easy, but if they do somehow manage to hit you, it can be a problem. The hitboxes are very vague and inconsistent in this game, and this can work in your favor sometimes, when enemies will inexplicably miss when they really shouldn't, but then there's other times where they can stun lock you. It happened about 2 or 3 times in my playthrough, and it always feels a bit unfair. At one unfortunate moment, I was passing through a door into a neighbouring hallway, and while passing through the small door frame, I got sort of wedged between enemies in both of the hallways. Of course, I kept getting stun locked from both sides, so I wasn't being given any opportunity to help myself. I somehow managed to wiggle my way out, unfortunately taking a lot of damage in the process, but the fact these kind of things can happen at all is not great. But I guess it evens out a bit considering most fights in the game, you can stunlock the enemy too. It really does reduce any strategy or tension in any combat encounter because of that though. So while stunlocking is an overall problem in The Ring Terror's Realm, it's one you can benefit from. Silver linings, I guess? Plus, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't funny that every time Meg is being attacked, they didn't bother to animate her struggling or trying to shake the enemy off, so she just kind of jitters really aggressively instead. She seems quite unaffected by everything she sees, actually. It won't take long before you notice that big ol' grin on her face. No matter who she's talking to or what she's doing, she's just beaming all the time, which turns very sinister once you notice she keeps that smile on her face even while killing monsters and seeing her friends in life-threatening danger. One reviewer at the time said, "The question must be asked, what's with that smile?" Regardless of the situation, Meg wears a disturbing Joker-esque leer throughout every scene of the game. Her boyfriend died the day before, she's all smiles. She's faced with a slobbering ape-like creature, big, dopey grin. It's disturbing. In terms of weapons, you've got the basic handgun, a shotgun, an assault rifle, and a grenade launcher. Towards the very end of the game, you find a katana too, but finding it so late means you don't get much chance to use it, sadly. While this might sound like a healthy spread of weapons, once again, all of the enemies operate the same. It's not like the shotgun is more effective against this guy, or the assault rifle is better for this fight. None of the weapons give you any particular combat advantage, so there's not much incentive to swap between these guns at all. This is made worse by the fact going into your inventory to equip a different weapon requires sitting through an almost 10-second fade to black, fade back in, super slow animation, so much so that swapping between weapons is a waste of time, if anything. It feels like they put a bunch of guns in the game because that's what survival horrors do, right? But forgot to incentivize you to actually use them all. It's kind of funny, honestly. Though perhaps what's even funnier than this is the secret weapon the game never tells you about. Towards the very end, I'm talking the last 30 minutes here, you can find parts to build a rocket launcher, the strongest weapon in the game. If you go to the men's bathroom on the first floor while in the Ring computer program, you can blast the door open where you'll find a tasty selection of goodies, almost 200 bullets total and 20 bombs to use as you please. But the kicker is, you can only access this room right before you return to the real world. And your items in the Ring computer program don't carry over to the real world. And there's also no point exploring anymore at that point, and even if you did and you found some items, again, none of it carries over anyway, so this room of goodies is absolutely worthless. It's useless. Yeah. All that aside though, the combat is passable. It's not great, but there's certainly clunkier horror games out there. What might be a little bit harder to get used to than the combat, however, are the controls themselves. The Ring doesn't make any use of the analog stick that the Dreamcast controller had, forcing you to use directional buttons instead, which already feels like a wasted opportunity. Meg's walking speed is far too slow, but then her running speed feels way too fast. Now, running fast doesn't sound like a bad thing, right? And certainly feels fitting for a horror game, but try turning around the bend of the many hallways in this game, and you'll quickly start to see why this is a problem. Meg's turning speed while running is so slow, she's like a car that you have to steer, and it feels very hard to precisely navigate her towards the narrow doors and exits. This sluggish movement also gets in the way during combat. There's no auto-aim here, so you have to pivot Meg towards the enemy to fight them, something that's easier said than done when Meg moves with the urgency of a casual Sunday stroll. When the devs were designing the movement and controls, it doesn't feel like they considered the environments you would actually be moving in. Compare this to the snappy, responsive movement of the classic Resident Evils, games that came out years before this did, and you'll see how this can be quite frustrating. Maybe I wouldn't mind this navigation as much if you were at least exploring more visually interesting locations. You've surely noticed at this point that this game only has two color palettes, grey and dark, and this is the extent of what you'll be exploring. Seriously, within the first 20 minutes of playtime, you have seen all of the locations in the game, and 6 hours of playtime later, you will still be exploring these same places. Either the CDC or the dark, twisted version of the CDC. And while they're pretty big areas, granted, that's it. You don't feel the reward of going from A to B to C like in other games. What you're seeing here is the entire game. Even within the CDC, the areas are all still quite samey. Every room has that clinical whitish-grey colour scheme, similar shelving, similar lab equipment, and so on and so forth. There's not enough visual landmarks or signage to differentiate one room from the next. So even towards the end of the game, I would still find myself running into a room and having to leave again because, oh yeah, sorry, I meant to go into one of the other 5 identical doors in this hallway. This results in no real sense of progression, literally or mentally. All this plot is happening around you, but you're still in the same place you were in 5 hours ago, so it doesn't really feel like things are moving much. You might think the Ring computer program will be the more exciting and thrilling answer to this, but no, it's just the CDC if they turn the lights off. You also have to make sure you constantly have batteries for your flashlight, because if it runs out, you're plunged into darkness. This might have been an interesting mechanic if the game didn't end up giving you batteries every 10 seconds, but hey, at the end of the day, I'd rather have too many batteries than too little. I imagine what would push many players to the brink of insanity, however, is the soundtrack. Though it doesn't feel like there's a soundtrack, granted, because 90% of your playthrough is spent listening to just one song. You'll be hearing this a lot. Practically any time you're in the real world, actually, which is where the majority of the playthrough is spent. You know, it's been a few years since I first played the Ring Terror's Realm, but trust me when I say the song has never left me. It's practically synonymous with the game itself because of how much it gets drilled into your brain. The funny thing is, the rare few times you do hear other songs on the soundtrack, they're pretty solid. There's a few stinkers in there, like this one track that is a 20-second loop of a jump scare stinger sound effect. But the songs that are good are pretty good, and it's an unexpectedly varied soundtrack when it wants to be. Sadly though, these bangers will only get 5 or 10 minutes of playtime tops, because most of your time is spent in the upper floor labs, so you better get used to those piano stabs. After watching the game, a wildly talented member of our community, Nosferatu, actually remixed the song by slowing it down, lowering it by an octave, cutting back in a few notes here and there, and playing it more softly. It's interesting to see that there's actually a pretty cool song in there somewhere. Pretty neat, right? Now, I said this game was a Resi clone, and that is definitely what they were going for, but they forgot a crucial part of the Resi formula. Puzzles. There aren't any, really. Like I said, the game is split into two halves, the dialogue-heavy real world versus the gameplay-focused computer program. Sure, the computer program side is where the enemies are and there's a heavier focus on exploration, but puzzle solving, like finding keys to unlock doors or little brain teasers like in other horror games, you don't really do any of that here. The general progression is still go to A, cutscene happens, go to B, kill a few enemies along the way, cutscene happens, rinse and repeat. It's almost endearing how so many of the core elements of a survival horror are missing here. The only constant threads are the story and dialogue. There is a fair bit of yapping here, and whoo boy, this dialogue! It is one of the most incoherent scripts I have read in a long time. The plot isn't even terribly complicated, but dialogue often goes in so many circles that it is conveying that plot to you in the most complicated way possible. Everyone tends to ramble here, and interactions between characters involve them constantly saying, "What are you talking about?" or "I don't know what you're saying." And you know, there's something comforting in knowing even the characters are just as confused as I am. This isn't helped by the very temperamental auto-scrolling dialogue. Sometimes you advance the text yourself, and sometimes you don't, but it seems completely random which one it'll be in any given conversation. I can't count the amount of times I might have momentarily looked away from the screen only to see, oh, that dialogue was auto-scrolling? Oh, okay, I missed like 5 sentences. Whoops. Now, my first instinct was this was just a classic case of a bad translation. Many such cases of this exist when it comes to Japanese games, and I figured The Ring Terror's Realm is no exception to the rule. At the very least, I would say the translator was in dire need of a thesaurus, because people are saying, in any case, every 2 minutes here. But I wanted to see for myself, so I played a bit of the Japanese version to investigate, and I was surprised to find that it's not much better in that language, to be honest. Translators are good, but they can't always be miracle workers. So then what is actually going on in the Ring Terror's Realm? Despite moving on from her boyfriend Robert's death in approximately 30 seconds, Meg just can't shake the feeling that something is amiss. Since Robert used to work at the CDC, Meg takes the opportunity to ask around the facility and see if she can uncover anything about his death. Most of the workers are pretty tight-lipped, especially her boss John, but she learns that Robert had a program on his computer called Ring a few days before his death, so Meg wastes no time using his old computer to jump into the program and see what she can dig up. Ring is a nightmarish otherworld, and it's in here she meets other military folks who all seem to know who she is already. The place is infested with these lizard and monkey enemies, and the game doesn't address why they're there, to be honest. Now, the original events of the Ring, aka all the people getting cursed by a videotape and dying 7 days later, happened a year prior to the events of Terror's Realm, so it's all old news by now. In the short time since, the curse has morphed into a virus and now a computer program. Meg learns about Sadako Yamamura, that's the TV ghost girl by the way, and is trying to track her down so she can stop all of this. She keeps seeing a ghost girl wandering around, but turns out that's not Sadako, but actually Sadako's mom, who's a kid for some reason, and clearly this is all just fun and games to her. So what exactly is Sadako's deal here? Well, she was born with psychic abilities and was seen as a witch by society. This led to her being murdered, and she has come back as a vengeful ghost to get revenge on the human race. This is all pretty lore accurate to The Ring. They even show clips directly lifted from the Japanese movie. And you gotta hand it to Terror's Realm for sticking to the script, but it is so hard to take the story seriously once the FMV cutscenes kick in.
Is this how you feel about the human race?
This is human race. Humans fear particularly those with extraordinary powers to protect themselves.
The chief of the CDC wants to use Sadako's powers for evil, big surprise there, and as we get closer and closer to the end of the game, we of course have a grand showdown with him.
You gave the virus to him? That was what turned him into such a monster? And that's what caused his death? All because of the virus?
Well, don't worry. You'll be with Robert very soon. In 24 hours, you'll be totally overtaken by the test virus. Before you die, you may help me to prove that I've got Sadako's force under my control.
You bastard!
But it doesn't matter anymore. If only I can use this power. Look, this is it, and I'm the only one who rules this force!
What's happening?
No, you can't. You'll never be the one who control this force. Never ever.
Love how he just changed colours between the cutscene and the gameplay there. This is a bit of a frustrating fight, mainly because he's quite strong and quite fast. If you were trigger happy up until this point, it's also very easy to walk into this fight with 0 ammo, which will make it even worse. Assuming you do have enough ammo though, his AI is thankfully very dumb, and I found locking him behind this table is a good way to get a few cheap shots in. As with any other enemy, it's also easy as hell to stun lock him, which means you get plenty time to enjoy the pretty banging music that only ever plays here. We find Sadako's secret lair, but she's already gone, waiting on the rooftop of the CDC for the final battle of the game. Fun fact, in this same room you can find a hidden item, Sadako's silver ring. Does it do anything? No. Why does it exist then? We head up to the roof and start the final boss, Sadako herself. Interestingly, this is the only enemy in the game that actually requires a minimal amount of strategy. Sadako will hop around and can whip her hair at you, which is nigh impossible to dodge, and eventually will turn into a bunch of crows. Once again, it is very hard to dodge these guys because they swoop in fast. Meg doesn't move nearly fast enough to handle 5 or 6 crows coming at you, so creating distance between them and you is a losing battle. You're just gonna have to tank a few hits, so going into this fight with a lot of healing is a must. Once you take her down, Sadako will die in Meg's arms, giving one final monologue about the selfishness of humanity. Meg thinks about Sadako's harsh words, and that's it. Roll credits. So is the plot any good? It's fine. It's serviceable, not particularly memorable, but it ticks all the survival horror boxes. Monsters, creepy lab, evil corporation guy, main character who wants to stop it all. What makes it memorable are the absurd FMV cutscenes and borderline maniacal dialogue. The fun is in the journey and not the destination, you know?
Did you see his face? What's happened?
Though in all seriousness, that's a pretty good way of summing it up overall. My critique up until now might give you the impression I didn't enjoy The Ring Terror's Realm, and that could not be further from the truth. I speak critically because, well, I'm keeping it real with you, there's a lot of flaws here, and yet any annoyances or frustrations I had while playing this game were washed away the second I made it to the next cutscene, and some scientist guy just says mid-conversation with no context, "You can't make fun of magic in Asia." No negativity here. I say this all with love, because The Ring Terror's Realm is, unironically, one of my favourite games. It is, for all intents and purposes, a bumbling mess of a game, a survival horror that fails at both the survival and the horror. It fails in almost every account, but it doesn't matter because it is so entertaining. Why is there a 20-song soundtrack and yet 90% of her playtime is spent listening to one of those songs, the most repetitive one too? But then it surprises you sometimes, like when it hits you with these soft, really pleasant visual novel style tracks, or with this unexpected drum and bass banger in one of the boss fights. The absolutely incomprehensible dialogue at points that falls somewhere between being poorly translated and probably just poorly written to begin with, and some conversations with characters that just go in circles and circles and circles until you can't help but just laugh. Like, sure, you're not following the story at all, but who cares? It's so funny just trying to keep up with it anyway. Or the complete lack of animation, so characters just phase through walls and floors and float into the sky, and you're just meant to accept it. It's just the way this game is. This isn't just an elaborate way of dunking on the game further. I mean it wholeheartedly when I say it is very endearing in how much it fumbles. Is The Ring Terror's Realm a good game? Technically, no. But is it entertaining? Absolutely. One of the funniest things I've ever experienced. And at the end of the day, that's all it needs to be. It's a game, right? A piece of entertainment. And entertaining it certainly is, whether on purpose or by accident. Maybe I'm so fond of it because you don't really get games like this anymore. Games are too expensive to fuck up nowadays. They cost millions or billions to make, whereas back in the 90s it was still a niche and experimental industry, and that's how gems like Terror's Realm slip through the cracks. It's almost like a guilty pleasure, a bargain bin energy that just doesn't really exist nowadays. But, my soppy ramblings aside, the question that might have crossed your mind: what does all of this have to do with The Ring? You know, it's been a while since I watched that movie and all, but I don't quite remember monkey monsters being a crucial plot point there. The answer to that is a bit complicated. Well, firstly, when you think of The Ring, you think of the cursed tape and a girl crawling out of a TV, right? Whether you're talking about the Japanese movie or its American equivalent, these are probably the core things that come to mind. Believe it or not, these movies are based on only the first in a trilogy of books, all written by Koji Suzuki back in the 90s. Even more, the films deviate a lot from these books. The main character is totally different, a lot of details about Sadako's life are either switched around or completely removed, and the iconic crawling out of a TV moment doesn't even happen in the books. That's totally original to the movie. In my opinion, all of these changes are for the better. I have a lot of issues with the books and how they're written, so in my personal opinion, both the Japanese and American Ring movies are a rare example of adaptations that are actually better than the source material. But I digress. The Ring Terror's Realm is based on the third book in this trilogy called Loop, almost unanimously agreed to be the worst of the saga thanks to its nonsensical plot. Why the devs chose the least loved book to base their game on, I have no idea. But even so, much like the movies, Terror's Realm also deviates a lot from its source material. There's a CDC and a deadly computer program, and Sadako is still kind of relevant, but everything beyond that is different, really. Once again, I would argue these deviations are for the better, because while the plot of Terror's Realm is very silly, it still doesn't overstay its welcome nearly as much as the third book does. But this still leaves us with a crucial, burning question. So what's up with all the monkey monsters, man? While there is practically zero development info on The Ring Terror's Realm, with a bit of internet sleuthing, we can piece some things together. I had my suspicions already, but I was happy to find an article on the Bad Game Hall of Fame website came to a similar conclusion as me. I highly recommend giving this a read if you want another thorough breakdown on this game, and credits to them for some of these findings. Taking a look at the game credits, a lot of Terror's Realm was outsourced to different companies, including the area designs, which were outsourced to a company called Design Combinat. Their website is up and running even to this day, and some unused concept art for The Ring Terror's Realm is still lurking on there. Funnily enough, this concept art looks far more interesting than any of the areas that actually made it into the game, but check out this note underneath it. The Japanese says, "Image of Special Forces headquarters for the Dreamcast game Ring, unused due to scenario changes." The plot thickens, but there's more. Turns out there's a bucket load of unused assets for this game. For example, the Chief, Robert, and a minor character, Kathy, all had military outfits that go completely unused in the final product. There's also another unused enemy model of, you guessed it, a monkey creature, and a bunch of items like lab keycards and chemical bottles that go unused as well. Lastly, there's a type of ammo that never made it into the final game either, simply called virus ammo. Now, with all of this being said, here is my theory. The devs were originally making a Resi clone survival horror for the Dreamcast, one that would follow Meg Rainman in a lab same as ever. The plot would revolve around some kind of virus or some creepy experimentation that turns people into monkey monsters and lizards. But one day, the publisher came along and said, "Actually, we want you to make a game based on The Ring instead." And, you know, knowing game development, they probably only had 6 months to do it, so they just repurposed their Resi clone into a Ring-themed Resi clone instead. Whoever that girl was, turn her into Sadako. These monkey monsters might have meant something in the original concept, but perhaps due to time constraints, they just decided to leave them in the final product anyway? It would also explain things like that silver ring you can find that I mentioned earlier, a useless item that serves no purpose now, but perhaps it was a key item that was crucial in the original game, before that was hastily turned into a Ring spin-off. We'll never know, sadly, but at least to me, this would certainly explain the game's confusing design choices. But my thirst for more knowledge about The Ring Terror's Realm didn't end there. Like I said, this game is quite the enigma. There's no info about its development anywhere to be found online. So during my travels, I managed to get in contact with Saness Stevens, the voice actress for Meg Rainman herself, who very kindly agreed to take part in an interview about her memories working on this game over 20 years ago.
I'm Meg.
Hi, I'm Egg. I'm Saness Stevens. I voiced Meg from The Ring back in, I think the year was 2000. I am a voice actress based in Tokyo, Japan. I'm originally from the United States, and I'm also a speechwriter, a writer, and a stand-up comedian.
I believe The Ring Terra's Realm was your first voice acting role in a video game? Did you find that yourself through, let's say, a listing somewhere, or was there like a talent agency that would have done that for you? How did you land the role?
You know, that's funny. I cannot exactly remember. I was either doing an improv show with the Tokyo Comedy Store, or I was walking down the streets of Roppongi. I cannot recall. It was a long time ago. What I do remember, it was quite random. It wasn't through an audition. It wasn't through an agency. Some guy was like, hey, you've got a great voice. You want to become a voice actress? I'm like, yeah, I do. Yeah, he offered me like 300,000 yen to do the voice for the game that I've never heard of. I've never even seen the movie The Ring. I mean, I've seen the promo video, but that's about it. I'm not really into horror. I get too sucked in. My imagination's too strong, and I'll never sleep again. So, yeah, I did not audition. He just liked my voice and thought I'd be good for this part.
When they were recruiting voice actors in Japan, I know another video game called Resident Evil was similar. The voice actors were effectively just plucked off the street. That wouldn't be the case nowadays, obviously, as I'm sure you're aware. It's video games have grown a lot as an industry since then. Were you in Japan over there on work at the time, or how did you find yourself in Japan?
Dreams of being a ninja. That turned out great, as you can see. But no, I came over, I was working and studying Japanese. And prior to coming to Japan, I had been doing improv comedy at SAC Comedy Lab in Orlando, Florida. Came over here, continued doing the same thing, and thought, I wonder how hard it would be to get into the talent industry. But horror games, not generally the genre I would be attracted to. And for horror games, as horror movies or anything, like this was the scariest horror game I've ever done in my life. Absolutely terrifying. Didn't realize it at the time, but now looking back on it, I could have been murdered. I followed this stranger. We exchanged phone numbers, came over to his apartment in Roppongi. Went up to his apartment. I remember it being on the second floor of this old building. And he bragged about how he had his internet hooked up 24 hours a day, because back then in Japan, it was a dial-up system and it was very expensive to be connected to the internet. This guy was like, you know, full flex with like, yeah, I keep my internet connected 24 hours a day. I never shut it off, even when I'm not using the internet. I remember walking in, there was no studio. It was this guy's Apple computer, desktop, and a microphone on a stand like this one, which it should be hanging, right, if you want to do it appropriately. I didn't have headphones. I couldn't hear what I was saying, but he was listening on his headphones. And I was just handed a script. There was no visual. There was no storyline. There's no direction. Nowadays, at least, you know, minimum, you'll get like the mocap actors, or you'll get some sort of graphics. Even if there's just like a picture in front of me, that would be great to see. I would love to know what the character looks like.
You didn't know anything about Meg as a character, even her appearance, even the game. You just knew it was horror, and that's about it.
That's about it. Yeah, and he wanted the voice higher pitched and sweet.
Higher pitched and sweet.
And
okay.
kind of naive, but finding strength. No, actually, my voice is so high-pitched that only dogs and small children can hear it. It's high enough to shatter glass, but not high enough to break the glass ceiling. Maybe that was me. I was naive because I walked into some strange guy's apartment I never met and recorded a game. And he was like, I think he said it was going to be for Sega, or I can't even remember.
Yes.
Yeah, and he was like, yeah, it's gonna be 300,000 yen. I'm like, wow, that's a month's worth of income. This is fantastic.
Sanes then went on to tell me about how she never ended up getting paid for her role as Meg.
And then he disconnected the line.
That was it?
That was it. Oh, he gave me the headphones he was wearing as a thank you. And they were Sony headphones. He grabbed the box out of the closet and he gave me these like really nice Sony headphones for which I had nothing to plug them into. I mean, this was pre-iPhone. I didn't even have a computer at home. It was just, there was not a lot happening for me for headphone usage at home. So I gave away the only payment I got for the game. It wasn't even payment. It was just a last minute like souvenir.
Does that mean all the lines for Meg were done in one day? It was just a one and done?
One and done. I think I got there at like 5 or 6 p.m. and I got home on the last train from Roppongi.
Right.
I remember because it was like a panicked run. And he was like, oh, yeah, you got to go. I think he did offer that I could crash there. And I was like, no, I'm good. Because it's like a one bedroom studio apartment, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I got to go home.
I presume then it goes without saying that you never met the other voice actors or interacted with them at all.
No, never met them. I don't know that any of them are still acting in Japan. I don't think any of them are still around. I'd never seen any part of the game. I had no idea what the graphics looked like up until last night when I ended up watching a YouTube channel. I was looking at yours and then I was trying to find like, what does the ring look like? I have no idea.
That's insane that you only have seen it last night after 24 years. So what did you think of it, I suppose?
I think it has been my honor to have brought horror to families around the world. What do I say about that? I was surprised and not so surprised. And then I heard the recording and it said, I'm Egg.
I'm Meg. Please, you have to help me.
Oh my God. He couldn't hear that through his headphones. Like nothing, or like phrases that were just clipped. What? Yeah, like, wow.
In particular, the opening scene of the Ring Terrace Realm, it just felt like, were these people in the same room?
No.
Yes, that's clear, I think, now.
We're not in the same room. We were in some dude's studio apartment.
I don't know if you caught this yourself at all when you were looking at the game, but I noticed in the credits for the Ring Terrace Realm, they misspell your surname Stevens as Steavens. Is that how you spell your surname, or?
No. I had no idea. I guess the guy really didn't take note. I must have scribbled my name on a piece of paper and he must have thought, there's got to be an A in there. I have no idea. I've never seen a Stevens with an A.
No, I've not either.
No.
In the last 24, 25 years, did it ever kind of cross your mind like, what, that game? Or was it just like, once you were finished the gig, that was it, you never thought about it again?
Yeah, I tend not to think about things. Just, okay, well, that was a fun experience. What's next? I mean, isn't that the whole reason why I moved to Japan? Learn to be in the now.
Very zen.
Very zen, if I'm thinking about, I wonder why that agent didn't pay me. Then I'm going to live my life in just like anger and hatred,
Yeah, no, that's actually a good way to be, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, all of these things they're fantastic experiences. They're great stories at the dinner table. Yeah, and I have wondered, am I ever going to run into this guy in the studios now? Sometimes I wonder, has he been on the back end of casting, giving me voice jobs just to make up for what he did in the past? I have no idea. Maybe he's the entire reason why I'm a success. It's probably this guy who's like, I feel really guilty about that, man. Probably should have paid her. Sony headphones, they're probably worth like, what, 10,000 yen? Let's give her a little gig here. She can be the voice of the alarm clock.
It was an absolute pleasure getting to talk to Sanas and learn so much about this charming gem on the Dreamcast. She's voice acted in a number of other video games as well, playing the role of Connie in the one and only Nightcry, one of the first games I ever covered on this channel, and a game I have a special relationship with. If you'd like to see our discussion about Nightcry, as well as stories about Sonas's time in the voice acting industry, I've uploaded it as a Patreon exclusive, so consider supporting me over there for just $2 if you'd like to check it out. Once again, thank you to Sonas for agreeing to take part in this interview. Now, the Ring Terror's Realm is definitely the biggest Ring game that has existed to date, and like I said earlier, was the only one to release in English-speaking territories, but we still have plenty more ground to cover, starting with Pachinko. Bet you weren't expecting that one. For anyone who's unaware, Pachinko is a form of gambling in Japan. You'll find the machines in Pachinko parlors around the country, which are basically just casinos. Unlike the more traditional slot machines you're probably thinking of though, Pachinko involves you shooting these small metal balls into the machine and then winning depending on where they land. Pretty straightforward stuff. What makes Pachinko so interesting though, and the reason why you've probably already heard of it before, is because it's very commonplace for Pachinko machines to be themed around a certain IP or series. If any of your favourite game franchises are Japanese, for example, there's a very high chance they've had a Pachinko at some point. Even within the horror sphere, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Fatal Frame have all had Pachinko, so it shouldn't come as a surprise then that The Ring has had its own fair share too. The visuals are usually pretty crazy, lots of explosions, sound effects, and just an overall sensory overload, but at the same time it's really cool to see franchises you're so familiar with in a brand new way, especially since they usually remake entire cutscenes from the game in shiny new graphics just for Pachinko. The physical design of the machines are also pretty sick. This one has Sadako's hands moving above the monitor. Ugh, it's so creepy, look at that. So it can be a fun rabbit hole to go down learning about this entire industry that is largely foreign to us in the West. In fact, there's still brand new ring-themed Pachinko being released to this day. This one, called Ringu Noroi no Nano Kakan, meaning The Ring, 7-Day Curse, has a really funky tidal wave design to its machine, as well as full cutscenes with real actors mixed in with CGI animated ones. Plus, there will always be something infinitely funny to me about seeing Sadako, the girl who tragically died at the bottom of a well and scorned humanity for it, and then in the Pachinko machine seeing her crawling the walls of the well like a spider at max speed. Why didn't she just do this in the movie, man? Could have saved herself a lot of hassle. Beyond gambling machines, there was also a phone game based on The Ring as well. This was a Japan-exclusive app for iOS and Android called Sadako M, Nikaiketsu Jiken Tantei Jimusho, which translates as Sadako M, Unsolved Case Detective Agency. It released in October 2021 and followed Tomone, who is investigating the mysterious death of her sister. She joins forces with the detective Kenji as they begin to unravel a series of unsolved deaths that eventually, and inevitably, lead them back to Sadako. The story would progress via these visual novel-style cutscenes where you play as an assistant detective to Tomone and Kenji. You can design your own cute little character who you'll then play as during the gameplay segments. These sections followed a basic survival horror formula. You're plonked in an area, look around for clues, find keys to unlock doors, and you even have to hide from enemies as well. And sure, it's basic, but considering this is a free-to-download game with very few microtransactions, I'm not complaining. I'd play this too if I had the chance. Yeah, if I had the chance indeed. Sadly, Sadako M was only available to download for just over a year before it was discontinued, going offline in February 2023. During its time online, it got regular updates adding new chapters and even had a few seasonal events, but I guess once the story concluded, they saw no reason to keep it online anymore. And I can't argue with that logic, but it's a shame that a game that clearly had a lot of effort put into it was only available for such a narrow window of time. I managed to get the app on my phone, but you just get stuck in an infinite loading screen of it failing to connect and restarting. It's completely unplayable now, which is a major bummer because the game looked really cute, and Chibi Sadako is something I wish I could have seen for myself. While the Ring Terror's Realm was cursed for a myriad of its own reasons, Sadako M was doomed to a much worse fate. Becoming lost media. Now let's go back in time once more to look at our next and final game of the day, Ring Infinity. Ring Infinity released in August 2000 on the WonderSwan, only 6 months after the Ring Terror's Realm. In case you're unfamiliar, the WonderSwan was a handheld gaming console that released in 1999, only in Japan too, so I can't blame you if you've never heard of it. While it did have the colossal competitor that was the Game Boy Advance at the time, the WonderSwan still held its own pretty well. By the time it was discontinued in 2003, it had sold 3.5 million units, which mightn't sound like much compared to some handhelds, but when you remember it was only sold in one country, it's not a shabby number. It had some pretty neat games too. The OG SNES Clock Tower, for example, one of my absolute favourites, had a port on the WonderSwan, and it's pretty dope. It's a one-for-one replica of the original game. The pixel art is pretty solid, honestly, just a bit more monochrome of course, but that's a small price to pay for its portability. But what we're focusing on today is Ring Infinity. This was a visual novel released exclusively on the WonderSwan. It's a completely original story, unique from the books, movies, and other games based on the Ring that we've discussed today. And obviously, being a visual novel, the primary focus is just reading. It's exactly what it says on the tin. It is a novel with visuals, though there is some decision making and branching paths to give it some replayability, as is typical in the genre. This game was part of Bandai's so-called Novel Theater series, a collaboration with the Japanese publishing agency Kadokawa Shoten in turning well-known novels into visual novels on the WonderSwan. This Novel Theater series had a big focus on audio design as well as realistic visuals, at least as realistic as the WonderSwan graphics would allow, and there were 4 games in this series total: Terrors 1 and 2, Last Alive, and finally, Ring Infinity. So let's check it out. We play as a nameless teenage protagonist just as the school day is coming to a close, when suddenly we hear a scream from one of the nearby classrooms. As everyone rushes to see what's happening, a girl runs towards us, begging us to help her before she lets out one final gasp and dies of a sudden heart attack. Naturally enough, the news of a student dying spreads like wildfire throughout the school, with the rumour saying the reason she died was because of a cursed videotape. Falling asleep that night while watching movies, our protagonist has a nightmare, somehow seeing the haunting, twisted visuals of the cursed tape. Learning he now only has 7 days before he'll die too, we must figure out how to save ourselves from the curse and prevent it from spreading any further. The interesting thing with this game is there are 3 chapters, each one following a different teenage protagonist. This scenario I just described to you is the first chapter, and it's more of a prologue than anything. The main character investigates the curse as much as he can over the 7-day period, with varying levels of success depending on the choices you make. Regardless of whether you succeed or not, the credits roll, and the next time you press play, you're moving on to chapter 2 with a brand new main character. And so, in that sense, this game feels more like a collection of Ring-themed short stories than it is one big story, and to me, that's a really creative idea for a spin-off. Think about it, the Ring movies and books follow the heroes who solve the curse of Sadako and live to tell the tale. But what about the dozens of victims who died before that? Those victims are where the focus lies in Ring Infinity, and I'm a big fan of it. It's a fun change of pace. And this cool concept is explored pretty damn well. Since the cursed tape is being passed around school, lots of people see it very quickly, and because of that, students are dropping like flies. The way to save yourself from the curse is, of course, by making someone else watch the tape, and there's quite a few tense moments throughout the game as teenagers resort to desperate measures to save themselves. In Chapter 1, for example, one of the protagonist's friends tries to broadcast the tape to the entire school in a last-ditch attempt to save themselves. They're willing to curse hundreds of students at once if it means not dying themselves, though ultimately they realise they're too late. I guess it's because the story takes place in such a busy, populated location like a school, and that makes the tensions and stakes feel a lot higher. While the first victim in the movie dies in her own home, the first victim in Ring Infinity dies in front of a crowd of students and teachers. It contrasts the slow burn storytelling of the original Ring quite a lot, but in a good way. It feels like a creative idea worthy of a spin-off instead of just rehashing the thing it's based on. There's some very clever writing here too. In Chapter 1, we never find out who showed us the tape and actually cursed us, but the game leaves enough crumbs in the narrative to allow you to speculate. After rereading it a second time, I strongly believe his childhood friend Kana showed him the tape. She was very pushy that he borrows and watches a quote-unquote recording of their favourite band, and on the 7th day, when he's mere hours away from dying, she's very sad and pensive during their final meetup, as if plagued by the guilt of knowing he's going to die because of her. But it's never confirmed. Much like the protagonist never finds out, we never find out, and that room for speculation is really fun. Now, before I continue, there's something pretty interesting about this game, about how you play it in particular. Being a visual novel, there's a lot of text, right? And unlike English, it's very common for the Japanese language, and a lot of Asian languages actually, to be written vertically instead of horizontally. You still get a lot of modern books, manga, and newspapers that write their text vertically. So imagine my surprise then when I boot up Ring Infinity, only to find the game was displaying sideways on the WonderSwan. The goal here was for you to turn the console sideways, and now making use of the taller screen, the game can fit way more vertical text while still keeping a nice pixel art visual at the top. This simply wouldn't be possible if you held the WonderSwan normally. The screen would be far too cramped between the text and visuals. I really like this creative use of not just the game software, but the physical hardware and how you hold it. It makes the player experience more memorable and more immersive. Ring Infinity was already a novel, but now it looks like one too. I can't think of many other games that did this, bar a few exceptions, but it's no surprise that the visual novel genre lends to this really well. Back to the story though. Because it goes for that short story format following different students, each chapter builds on the last in a very gradual way. The first protagonist is unsuccessful and so ultimately doesn't make much progress. The second protagonist learns more about Sadako, but the third one manages to make it all the way to Izu Oshima, the resting site of Sadako, even finding the infamous well where her body lies. But they too are unsuccessful. At the end of the third chapter, you'd think you'll move on to the grand finale. Surely this person's gonna figure it out and save themselves from the curse, right? But no. It loops you all the way back to chapter 1 again. Huh. And it continues to loop, over and over, and it's quite bleak. Back in the 2000s, rumour had it that there was indeed a good ending in this game, but no one figured out how to get it yet. So players tried over and over, different routes, different decisions, anything, because surely you can save at least one of these characters, right? And yet no one could figure it out. So Ring Infinity became known across Japan as a cursed game. People said that it was the game no one ever truly completed, and if you see the true ending, then you die too. First print editions of Ring Infinity even came with a talisman to protect you from evil. A cute inclusion for sure, but one that just further added fuel to the rumours that this game is indeed cursed. I'm not even a superstitious person, and even I was getting a little nervous reading up about it. This infamy stuck with it for years until 2016, when a user on 2chan finally took the time to painstakingly comb through the game's files. While there isn't a distinct good or true ending where a character lives, you are able to ever so slightly impact the ending regardless. To explain, there's an invisible point system going on throughout the entire game depending on your choices, and the amount of points you have will alter the final moments of Chapter 3. The differences are very minor, and all three outcomes still result in death, sadly. Either you fall into the well, your friend falls in, or both of you fall in. Regardless of which ending you get, Sadako's curse remains unbroken, and the game will then loop back into Chapter 1 with the first protagonist all over again. But there is one small change. The game opens with his schoolmates discussing rumours of the cursed tape and its victims, and this piece of dialogue will change depending on which ending you just got in Chapter 3. The chapters will continue to loop over and over and over, hence the game name being Ring Infinity. This progression is so clever, if not a bit depressing, and I'm not surprised rumours of a true ending were so rampant for years. It's quite a brave narrative choice to give players absolutely no option for a positive outcome, but I gotta say, I admire the devs for committing to it. While Ring Infinity was quite a niche release even for the time, fans have looked back on it positively. It's got good audio design and strikingly realistic pixel art visuals for starters, but it deserves particularly strong praise for its innovative storytelling, specifically in how the cursed tape is passed around. Remember how, back in the 2000s, you'd sometimes get emails that say things like, if you don't forward this to 10 people, you'll be cursed tonight, or something similar. It sounds so silly and childish now, but back in the early internet days, emails like that were rampant. In Ring Infinity, the tape is passed between students in the form of a cursed chain email just like this. Only difference here is that the curse is real and not just fear-mongering. It's a very cool blend of the Ring's existing premise with an internet phenomenon relevant to the late 90s and early 2000s. And sure, a story like this mightn't work so well nowadays. We've all wised up to technology and know how it works by now. But back then, when things like the Y2K scare meant fear of technology was at an all-time high, writing it into your horror game's plot was some pretty smart thinking. And you know what? Maybe I'll take a page out of their book. This may be the end of our journey looking at the Ring's colourful history of video games, but I didn't let you in on a little secret. Truth is, this video is cursed too, and the only way to break the curse is by passing the video on to 10 of your friends, and liking and commenting and subscribing. Oh no! Rumour has it, if you don't, then after 7 days, Meg Rainman herself will crawl out of the well. Ugh, I shiver at the thought. But nah, as if. There's no way that's true, right? Right? Yo, thank you so much for watching the video. This was a really fun one to make, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you'd like to support the channel, then consider checking out my Patreon, where you can get early video previews, behind-the-scenes voice diaries, and full spoiler-free game reviews that I don't upload anywhere else. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.